Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome. So if I just go here, what we're going to be doing now is effectively running through our Q&A. And again, no financial advice has been given, but really just trying to answer the questions. I'm not quite sure how to do this because we've had an overwhelming amount of questions. And so I'm going to just kind of start at the top and we'll see how we go, and any advice from yourself, Clem, I'd also appreciate, because fast as you're talking, people are writing more questions. So I'm not quite sure how to do this, to be honest. Let me just find you there. I'm going to pin you so that everyone can see you. Pin you, yeah, pin myself.
Scott, can you make me co-host, please?
Okay. Shane going. Sorry, just these guys. Let's just get Shane sorted here. Make co-host. Okay, we're done. Okay. So the first question is Lee Rush, and I can see she's in the room. And to some extent, some of these were asked a couple of weeks ago. So they might have been covered already. But this one, I really look forward to the webinar. Here are two questions. The first one, given the current economic challenges, such as rising inflation, geopolitical tensions, and increasing inequality, what new scenarios would you propose to help business and governance navigate these uncertainties? Specifically, how would you differentiate between high road and low road scenarios in today's context?
Yeah, well, it's funny enough, in that matrix that you have, it's very much the hard times scenario at the moment. It's unfortunately, we're also descending now into a more divided world, and therefore, it's, as one of the people has just said, you need, well, in fact, two people just said you've got to have access to the kind of knowledge that allows you to make smart investments around the world, and most ordinary people simply don't have that access. And in a sense, Scott, I must congratulate you that you're providing that access to allow ordinary people to make the kind of decisions that obviously very rich people are making because they have a continual discussion with their advisors.
It's fascinating you say that, Clem, because, for me, one of the things that I'm passionate about, but equally one of the things I'm angered by, is exactly what you said earlier about, the ultra wealthy and since 2008 and how they consistently, I mean, they're getting wealthier and wealthier. And I always ask people when I stand on stage, I'm like, well, what do they do differently? And people are like, oh, they've got, better relationships, or they got more money, or they, whatever, were born or went to the right university. I'm like, no, it's none of those. They invest in better assets, simply, and say, like, literally, like, their quality of assets is why they have geometrically grown compared to everyone else. And it's like a party that 99% of people aren't invited to, along with the knowledge, but access as well. And, it's something that I mean, you spoke about it tonight, you speak about it in all your writings. If we don't change it, it's going to go the wrong way, in terms of where the world's going.
Yeah, and I have to make one other point, is that these people who are super rich don't just look at capital gains, they look at dividend yields and, the income coming out of their investments too. So, it's... I've done one or two sessions, similar to the one that I did today with, a group of ultra rich investors, and they make this point, which is that, it's not just about trying to make double your money because the share price goes up. It's about being wise on income. And particularly in the kind of easy money times that we've had, where you simply don't until very recently you haven't earned that much money on having your money on deposit at a bank.
So it's so interesting you say that, Clem. Again, I find it so interesting because the middle class and professionals are always going after capital growth. Whether it's a house or Bitcoin, they always sort of sit and they go, oh, I bought Bitcoin for this and it's gone to that. And yet when I hang around, and I've had the privilege of hanging around wealthy investors, they talk about the income. It's the passive income that gives them the freedom, not the arguable capital growth on their house, etc. So it's fascinating what you just said there, and even the dividends, etc., that are being paid out, by shares or whatever it is, It always reminds me of Warren Buffett, who bought Coca-Cola. I think he owns about 15%, and it's one of the most stable dividend distribution shares out there, and
Yeah.
there's reason for this, Tell me, in terms of there's a lot of questions around technology. So let's maybe kind of do it as one overall question. You have already kind of gone into the AI thing, but in an era marked by rapid technological advancement, climate change, and shifting global power dynamics, what key indicators or flags would you recommend leaders monitor to stay behind the potential economic shifts and crises? So I think in many ways you've probably answered that with the different flags that you've gone through. But specifically on this like AI one.
Can I just make one point, which is that the two most innovative nations right now, without a doubt, are America and China. Unfortunately, Europe, which was the innovative hub of the 17th and 18th centuries, and even into the 19th century, was the sort of center of innovation. I can't think of that many major innovations over the last 20 to 30 years that have come out of Europe. And, when you look at the high-tech giants are either American or Chinese. So it is interesting how technical innovation has shifted geographically in today's world.
Yep. No, completely. Tell me,
and NVIDIA, of course, was started by somebody who emigrated from Taiwan to the United States.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Angie asked a question here, and she said, big business leaders, I'll share my screen just so people can see it. She said, big business leaders met with Cyril and his cabinet post GNU and chose 3 priority areas to focus: energy, logistics, and crime. Secondly, they'll prioritize fixing the water crisis, dysfunctional municipalities, and improving basic education. Hopefully, these were included in these meetings. Do you think these are the correct priorities? If not, which would be added? And what could SMEs do to assist in having an impact and assisting moving SA forward? And how could we get this happening in a coordinated way?
Yeah, no, look, I'm totally into those, the energy, logistics, and crime aspect. But I just feel that there should be some kind of radical discussion about small business, because it is still kind of parked in its own ministry. And you don't hear the president going on about entrepreneurs and it is, for me, the absolutely prime objective of the next 5 to 10 years of GNU is how do we create this kind of bottom-up revolution? I remember in the debate I did with Julius Malema at the Cape Sun in February 2016, I actually said, I'm just as much of an economic freedom fighter as you are, Julius. It's just that my definition of economic freedom is different to yours. I don't think nationalizing the banks, the land, or anything else will help ordinary people. What we've got to do is find a way of providing the support and the freedom so that they can become entrepreneurs. And, there is a book out by a guy called G.G. Alcock called Casinomics, which shows that we're not talking about people peddling things on street corners. There are a lot of township businesses which have actually developed into 30 or 40,000 rand a month businesses, and it's still regarded as informal trading. In fact, G.G. Alcock took one of the entrepreneurs onto Alec Hogg's program the other day, who was an auctioneer in the townships, and he explained how his business worked, because people do want to, sell their things because of the limited space that they have. And I don't think we've even started the conversation around, as I said, e-stock exchanges, having the kind of equivalent to a Grameen bank that doesn't turn into the VBS, and all the other things which we should be doing, which is the only way we're going to solve that chronic unemployment rate that we have.
There's an interesting one here, and you've already kind of gone to it with the 8th flag, the national debt around the world. And you went on to talk about America and how the debt is double, this percentage-wise of where it was. And you literally
the ratio of national debt to GDP, which is now 125% in America. Yeah,
correct. And you literally said, hence a day of reckoning, like what happened when the subprime mortgages fell out of bed. maybe around the corner. You're effectively talking, and the question here from Craig was, and you know, we can talk. I think we should talk internationally first rather than just South Africa. But what do you foresee happening around the financial markets over the next decade?
That's a terrible question. I'm afraid to say that, you know, that's why you should be diversified, because it's very, very difficult to say where you're going to be in 6 months or a year. I mean, a lot of people were talking during COVID and just after COVID of the world going into recession and the markets would go into decline. Actually, I mean, about a week ago, you know, most markets were hitting record highs. The Dow Jones, the Standard & Poor's index, the German stock market, you know, around the world, it's all the kind of negative stuff that I talked about of the wars in Ukraine and Israel. It's as though they didn't exist, because the markets have actually hit record highs. Now, am I about to say, no, well, you know, they're about to drop to record lows? No, I couldn't possibly say that, as I don't know enough about the markets to say that. But obviously, you know, the most important thing, like I said, with that flag on the, you know, aging of certain demographies, that Europe is aging and Japan is aging. America is still relatively young until the second half of the century, and India was mentioned, and India is a young, vibrant population. That this particular flag has to come into play when you're considering where you want to invest. But I would absolutely say to people, you know, you must have part of your wealth in property, part in bonds, part in the bank, shares, different currencies. Diversification is the key, because as a fox, you actually don't know exactly which scenario is going to be in play over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And you've got to be resilient, is the right word, towards any of those scenarios, which probably means that you won't make as much money as one or two brilliant hedgehogs who have one idea, they bet on it, and they make an enormous amount of money out of it. Like, as I said, the guy who started NVIDIA has obviously made a huge amount of money. There are people like that who make money out of a single idea, but most of us ordinary people make 8, 12, 15, 20% per annum, because we've got a sort of wise portfolio for our wealth.
It's, I mean, absolutely fascinating what you just shared there. And, you know, something that it leads on. And you've kind of spoken about India, you've spoken about this grey flag. And the question here was the future drivers of the global economy. As the global economic landscape shifts, which countries or regions do you predict will emerge as dominant forces by 2025? And if you don't mind, I'm going to add an extra caveat, because it's come up quite a few times in the questions, is around BRICS as well. And just your general thoughts on, you know, whatever, 10 years from now, this you know, who are going to be the more dominant players, you know?
Well, you know, this is the whole point of the scenarios, is to give people a feel for the kind of world we're moving into right now, which is a bipolar world where you have BRICS. And, you know, a lot of people in the West just, you know, dismiss BRICS as, say, oh, no, well, it hasn't got the kind of organization that G7 has. And, you know, it's just a kind of a group which will probably part company. I don't see it that way at all. In the gilded cage world, you know, BRICS is the other entity, and of course it has China in it, which, even though, as I said, the aging process in China is bringing down the economic growth rate, China is still growing at 5%, which is a hell of a lot more than Europe's growing at the moment, or the UK. So my view is that the Far East, and, you know, places like South Korea and China, and obviously certain South American countries which are relatively well governed, and there are one or two African countries which haven't done badly at all. Namibia is actually had a fairly brilliant economy over the last few years. You know, so with the continents with younger populations, it's most important that you look at the flag of good governance, because those countries with the young populations and relatively good governance will obviously offer better investment opportunities than Europe and the UK, which, as I said, is beginning to look like Japan.
Craig's been asking some great questions, and this is a tough one to answer. So I'm going to ask it, but it's a tough one to answer. So diversified investments in a changing world. Given the current global uncertainties and rapid technology advancements, which sectors or asset classes do you believe will offer the most resilience and growth potential over the next decade? And what strategies should investors in South Africa consider to effectively diversify their portfolios in this evolving landscape?
Well, my view is that probably the sectors which will do best over the next 10 years, 10 to 15 years, will be those sectors which offer technology on green energy. I've been following this quite closely, and particularly along with some Americans who, as I said, are involved in climate change. And there are just so many opportunities at the moment of moving away from fossil fuels and moving towards energy-saving technologies that, along with AI, I think the next very big thing we're going to see in the world, because we're going to be overcome with this extreme weather. And so I think that you're going to see governments offering much greater incentives to people and to companies to move towards greener footprints. So that particular field for me is going to be the one that should be investigated most closely in terms of investment opportunities. It's green energy.
It's funny because Sandy Lotz literally asked that question about artificial intelligence and renewable energies, etc. So it's just really interesting what you just said. Yeah. Nick asked a question, and it's with regards to South Africa. For South Africa to grow and develop, one of the things that we need to happen is the high level of inequality needs to be reduced. Do you see this happening, and if so, how?
No, well, that's absolutely it. It's and the high level of inequality is driven by the fact that 35% of our population officially doesn't have jobs, and you also, as I said, have an informal sector which has no real support, trying to do its best to make a living somehow, that should be the number one issue in South Africa. And I know the politicians talk about, we've got to reduce poverty and inequality and all these things, but I don't want to hear that kind of rhetoric anymore. I want to start, talking about specific ways that we can reduce the dreadful inequality in this country, and I'd love other people to become experts on how we can, for example, that RDP housing program, which came in with Mandela. It actually created some livable in houses around the place. And when I kind of drive past all the shacks which people have put together to live in and everything else, there's an extraordinary opportunity to upgrade simple housing in this country, like we did with the RDP program. I want a discussion about how can we do that using entrepreneurial skills, local business firms, not the sort of big construction companies. How can we create a better community to live in by using the skills that are available?
Awesome. In terms of Andre's question, it's in some ways it's related to what you've been talking about, but do you think the US will lose the reserve currency status? And this sort of then ties back in with BRICS,
Yeah, that's why I quoted that figure, that at the moment, as I said, 80% of the world's reserves, foreign reserves by governments, are held mostly in dollars and a smaller percentage in euros. So, it's going to need quite something for BRICS to, get people to move towards other currencies. And I know there's talk of a BRICS currency and all that. And of course, we know all about, the sanctions that are around to try and stop Russia using dollars to buy things elsewhere in the world. So, there's a lot of driving forces towards having a less dependence on those two Western currencies. But I don't know how long it's going to take to to create this multi-currency world. But the one thing I'm certain of, which is you can certainly learn from some of the economists in the US, is that this thing of just going up at $1 trillion every 6 to 9 months of US debt can't last forever. Yes, as I said, you can print the money, but the game will be up soon, and that's maybe will be the trigger for creating this more multi-currency world.
Nomonde, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, said, given the South African economic state, do you think GNU will live up to their foundation principles, specifically of human dignity and socio-economic rights?
Well, I hope so. I mean, you could see when GNU was formed and we had that first week and 2 weeks, the markets improved, the currency, the rand strengthened. People thought, gosh, we've avoided yet another disastrous kind of fallout between the major parties. And so the kind of news we've had this week that there may be a kind of an issue such as the BELA, as it's called, the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, but maybe it could be something else, destroying GNU. What would happen next? Would there be another general election? Would the ANC then seek to go into partnership with MK and the EFF? They really must understand, the people in GNU, just how important it is to keep that that model going, because at the end of the day, it's all about, as I said, creating this bottom-up revolution in South Africa in the economy. And the worst thing is if we get back into a political war in this country where we lose the focus on this incredible challenge of creating people's economy.
She asked another question, which I think is also good. What would you recommend businesses and just ordinary people do to adjust to the AI world?
Well, I mean, I've read as much as I can about AI, and obviously the most important thing is to ask yourself, how can I use AI to improve my life? And so one of the things that I've done, and a lot of other people have done, is ask the AI sites questions about things you're interested in, and it's amazing how sophisticated the answers are. And I know that they've just been put together by a program which has looked at all the kind of, data in the cloud around the world. But it is amazing how much knowledge you can gain by asking the right questions of AI. And obviously, businesses should be asking the questions of how they can improve their business in terms of people's skills as well as technological skills. AI is obviously a vast source of knowledge to ask the right questions of. And I'm just amazed that there are so many people who still haven't actually sat down and gone to those AI sites and said, what about this, which is a question which is relevant for their own future.
Look, I mean, I mean, we were doing it just yesterday with a bunch of people, and it's incredible. I mean, if you go to ChatGPT, which is free, by the way, and just play around with it, there's no downside, but it's absolutely incredible. I mean, we used to have a copywriter last year that we would have been paying, or so when I say last year, 2022, that we were paying about 30,000 Rand a month, full-time employee in our company. And what took her 2 weeks, we can now regurgitate in 30 seconds. It's like unbelievable, like, you know, in terms of that information. So Judy asked a question: what impact is the trend of the anxious economy likely to have on our future?
Sorry, the trend of the...
So she said the anxious economy. I'm not 100% sure what she means.
Yeah, that's why the anxious economy. Yeah,
Okay.
well, I mean, there's a lot of anxiety around at the moment, given the two wars that are going on, given, as I said, the division that we have between G7 and BRICS, given the kind of, you know, problems right now with GNU, there's a hell of a lot of anxiety around and fear. And the worst thing you can do in that situation is nothing. You've got to continue to make smart decisions about not only where and how you invest, but also about your own life. And as I said, as a fox, it's not just surveying the scenarios and the flags. It's then deciding what the optimum strategy is for the time being, which can involve, you know, staying here in South Africa, moving somewhere else in the world, you know, moving your money elsewhere. It's, you know, what you mustn't do is get paralyzed by anxiety. That is the worst thing.
Yep. There's a question here about Thomas. He said the current scenarios that a young 20-plus investor versus a 50-plus investor have to face at the moment are quite unique, albeit challenging for both. Which strategies would you recommend new investors need to start to implement ASAP from within those two age categories in 2024?
Well, certainly the point about 20-year-olds is that you know, you've got a long time, hopefully, if your health holds up and all that, to invest the money. So we come back to that point I was making earlier, which you agreed with, is you must look at both capital gains and income. And don't be greedy. Don't look to double your money every year and so forth and so on, because the law of compounding returns is that you can double your money every 10 years with a 7% growth, or in 7 years with a 10% growth. You know, in other words, when you're young, you should seek to have a reasonable return, taking into account both capital gains and income. Obviously, when you're older, in your 50s, you've got to start looking at what happens when you retire. You know, that's why people have both living and retirement annuities, is to actually, you know, try and secure their life post retirement from their job. But certainly, I know that you still continue once you're retired. If you have a clever financial advisors, you can still make considerable money out of the investments that you've put aside during the years that you've worked.
Yeah. Mike's asked a question here, and it's somewhat related to what you've already discussed, but could the ever-increasing national debt in the US cause investors to pull funds out of the stock market and or property markets in the US? If the US markets fall, as US and international investors likely to buy short-term US bonds, or will the price of US bonds also fall? Are there any markets that will be seen as a safe haven, e.g. emerging markets in Asia, if the US stock markets fall, or would all stock markets fall with the US market? Would the price of oil and other commodities be likely to fall if the US stock markets fall?
Well, if you look at the great financial crash, everything fell. There were very few places that you didn't take at least a third. You didn't lose a third of your wealth, whatever you were invested in. So for me to kind of say, well, there is the ultimate defense mechanism, because even you know, solid assets like property fell during that particular time. And you might say hold gold, and that will work for you. You know, the gold price hasn't done that well during really tough periods, because people realize their gold holdings to basically live. And so, yeah, what you can, as I said, is you can try and minimize your loss through diversification. But to me, there are no golden havens that you can invest in to avoid all the losses that are being made in America or wherever. Because just look at the media in the morning. It's all about what the American market did last night. Did the Dow Jones go down? Did the Standard & Poor's go down? It affects the Australian market, and then as you move through Asia to the European markets, if the Dow went down yesterday, usually Europe goes down. Sometimes they go the other way, but I'm afraid to say there's still a huge amount of influence and obviously attention paid to what happens in America.
Michael asked a question. He's based out of Europe, and he said, I have these questions, global and local water security. As water scarcity becomes a growing concern worldwide, particularly in regions like Mallorca and Southern Europe, what do you foresee as the key challenges and solutions for ensuring stable water supply in the future?
Yeah, no, absolutely spot on question that, because there are so many places right now facing this. And, there was an article, I've forgotten whether it was in The Guardian or one of the newspapers, about, possible water wars between countries that have, that are on the same river, and one country putting a dam in which leads to diminishing water supplies to the other country and all that. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure what you do. I mean, I did a session, gosh, it must have been about 20 years ago, with South Australia because the Murray River had decreased in volume because of farming in upstream in the Australian states further up the north in the Murray River, but also because of the increasing heat that Australian summers now have. And the only real conclusion that was made out of that particular session was that one had to have much smarter irrigation techniques for Australian farmers. And indeed, they brought in, I think, some Israeli specialists because they are, in Israel in a perpetual state of being short of water. So they've devised the skills, and they brought in some of those people to be, I think, academics at the University of Adelaide to help with that problem. So, there are technologies available to reduce the consumption of water in irrigation. But of course, if it goes beyond a certain point, people have to move because you run out of water. And I'll tell you, the one place which I'm watching like a hawk at the moment is Mexico City, because Mexico City has a lot of people and it's running out of water.
Oh, wow. Michael also asked a question. He said, the World Economic Forum and global influence. The World Economic Forum, as a non-governmental organization, seems to wield significant influence, especially through bodies like the UN and WHO. Many argue that COVID-19 pandemic was exploited by these organizations to advance agendas like Klaus Schwab's Great Reset. How do you view the role of the WEF in shaping the future, and what can individuals or organizations do to resist potential overreach?
Well, the World Economic Forum for me is, it's a grand place to meet once a year and all that. I don't want to obviously very influential people go to that forum, both from the private sector and from government. So yes, there may be some kind of change in the course of the decision making made by the kind of discussions that happen there. But one mustn't, if you go through my flags, I think that there are just much more important forces in play in terms of, creating a better future. And as I said, probably the much more important flag than the World Economic Forum is the leadership flag. You've got to have good leaders. You've got to have a good American president. You've got to have a kind of a better Chinese president. They've got to talk to one another. That's the kind of thing that's going to change the trajectory of the world, rather than an institution like the World Economic Forum. And talking of COVID, you know, there was a real issue, and I mean, I know that there are probably a lot of people maybe dying in California right now and in Australia that we don't know about because we no longer keep the figures. But there was an extraordinary uptick in number of deaths around the world. You know, in that first year of COVID, when it was a fairly vicious variant that was dominating, and it was only when you know, the new variants came in that the kind of real threat went away. And as I said, I've still got that flag of a pandemic, you know, on my list because it happens. It's like you know, there was the Black Death in Europe, which killed 25% of the population. You know, there's still, you talk to doctors, they will tell you that you know, that viruses can mutate. And they can mutate into ways that even the most modern drugs can't cope with. So I would never remove that flag from my particular screen.
Clem, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask two more questions here. AAC Mining started a project to generate its own electricity. It's an indication of things to come. Big corporate generating their own power, and the effect on Eskom would be they lose their prime customers. How would essential non-corporate services be maintained?
Well, you know, this whole point about, you know, it's not a question of not just reducing power as much as you can that you're taking from Eskom or whatever it is. It's obviously examining ways of alternative ways of creating electricity and all that. That's why you have hydrogen mine vehicles. You have you know, people looking at different ways to, you know, create energy which can power plants. And you know, I drove recently up to look at the flowers in the northern part of the Western Cape, and you now pass a lot of solar farms on the way up, you know, where people are actually putting in a lot of solar panels. That has its own problem because, you know, it's quite tricky recycling solar panels. But nevertheless, you know, that is happening. I have to make one point, though, that the world just blundered into electric vehicles without really looking at, you know, the kind of network you require to drive these vehicles. And, you know, I've heard from quite a few sources in Australia, in America, and elsewhere, you know, that people are now moving back, unfortunately, to, you know, to either hybrids or even back to diesel and petrol vehicles because they just find it so inconvenient with electric vehicles, and particular how costly it is to replace the battery, the kind of lithium battery of an electric vehicle. So, as I said, there's still a huge amount of opportunities to reduce the cost of green energy, but also, you know, make it make anything that runs off green energy that much more efficient.
The last question here, to be honest, we could talk for 3 days. There's so many questions. I mean, I was trying to read through them to try and see if I could summarize any of them. But Mike's got a question about the UK, and he said, so he lives in England. He said, we've had low productivity since 2008. The new Labour government says that it intends to run higher, tighter fiscal policy and probably achieve this by increasing revenue from capital gains tax and inheritance tax. How likely do you think it is that UK productivity and UK GDP will increase over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, my answer is I'm very disappointed, to be honest, with the kind of measures being taken by the Labour government, because it runs totally counter to creating the kind of entrepreneurial economy that the UK used to be. I mean, for heaven's sake, as I said, you go back 200 years, it was the UK that produced all the incredible technical innovations. And so I would be asked the right question to ask, and one of the other philosophers I have in the book, thinking the future is Socrates, that much of, life is about asking the right questions. And it's not about how do we solve the government deficit by, raising taxes on capital gains, by cancelling the winter fuel arrangements for pensioners, and all these things. It's actually saying, what is it that we have to do to improve the prospects for, all the entrepreneurs we have in the UK? How do we allow companies to improve the productivity of their workers using AI or whatever it is? I'm afraid to say there's a certain amount of, I guess the right word is sort of socialist practice that is creeping in to UK government policy. And it's not that you shouldn't think of the living conditions of the broad masses. I'm absolutely into that. So I'm not that kind of total free market thinker that you have at some universities. But, you must never lose sight of the fact that if the UK wants to become a more prosperous society, you've got to create those conditions that allow small businesses to thrive. And I haven't heard any of that coming from Keir Starmer or any of his cabinet colleagues. It's just all about, how we're going to raise taxes to balance the budget that Rishi Sunak left us. and as I said, there's a real problem in the UK now, but with national health. There's this waiting period, the shortage of doctors and nurses. It's really tough, but you don't solve it by just raising taxes, and particularly taxes on people who've had bright ideas and have created businesses and so forth and so on. I just hope that they see more sense in trying to have a balanced policy and not sort of just pursue the kind of traditional kind of socialist way of kind of creating a better life. Because I'm afraid to say, you look around the world, as I said, in China absolutely had an economic revolution second to none, because Deng Xiaoping did the exact opposite of what communism said, which was, allow ordinary people to create wealth for themselves. He was pragmatic. He was a pragmatic guy. I mean, I might just end by saying I had a 5 hours with Nelson Mandela in January 1990, a month before he was released, because he'd read my book on the high road, low road. And the thing that really came across in those 5 hours of being questioned by Nelson Mandela is he wanted to know what worked in the world to create a winning nation. He wasn't interested in, ideologies. He wanted to do things that worked. And I always remember when he, presented the trophy to Francois Pienaar when we won the World Cup. There were a lot of people in the ANC who were against Nelson Mandela for supporting the box. But he knew that would really work in terms of his one great goal of achieving greater reconciliation between the races. And so, that's why I put so much emphasis now on the GNU. And that's why I call it pragmatism. We need that here in South Africa, but equally they need it in the UK.
Well, it's interesting. I was at the Cape Town Stadium on Saturday, and Nelson would be smiling down from wherever he was, because it was the most incredible multicultural atmosphere. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and I have to say, Siya Kolisi is absolutely the positive sign of what a leadership flag can do. He can take people from totally different backgrounds, put them together with the coach, and be the best team in the world. For God's sake, South Africa is the best team in the world. And that just shows what you can do if you have that kind of magic quality of leadership.
Clem, I want to just chuck one last one in that came up a few times that I noticed I haven't asked, and I would love to actually finish on that high you just said, but it is an important one. What are your thoughts on this cryptocurrency space and kind of where cryptocurrency in general is going?
Yeah, look, it's obviously created this kind of space for people to hold something beyond dollars because they worry about the US national debt or whatever it is. They worry about, as I said, Europe's the euro because of the growth prospects, and so the cryptocurrency, rather like gold, has become the alternative. And yes, it's done extremely well. I mean, the only thing that really worries me about cryptocurrency is that it does seem to be the way that gangsters around the world avoid, paying tax or, concealing their wealth and concealing their money. That's why I have a suspicion around cryptocurrency. Do I have any cryptocurrency? The answer is no. I don't. But I'm not for one moment saying that people shouldn't hold crypto because it has done extremely well in terms of the how the value's risen since it was actually created. But yeah, for me, I'd prefer to be traditional and stick to shares, bonds, cash, and property.
Clem, I really want to thank you. Just before we wrap it up, I've got a gift to give you, and we've actually got a surprise for you. But just to remind those, I know there's a bunch of mastermind members who are already here, but we will be taking people on Wednesday through the 9 steps to generational wealth. And again, just some of you are actually here tonight. I saw Cynthia, I saw Derek. I'm not sure, Abdul, if I saw you. But just some of the video clips of kind of people that have actually experienced it. If you do want that, book a call with Alex and the team. I highly recommend sitting down and/or use our next steps navigator in terms of that process. And I wanted to finish on a high for you, Clem. There was a gentleman that got hold of us through Facebook actually when we were promoting it. And I don't know if Carlo is here. Carlo, you here? Can you unmute? No, we're not hearing you yet. You need to unmute.
Oh dear. I have to
Can
say I'm
you
much younger.
Hello?
Yeah, Carlo, we can
Hello?
hear you. Yeah, we got you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Clem. Pleased to meet you.
Pleased to meet you too.
Can you hear me, Clem?
And I love the picture.
Just to thank you. Just to give you a bit of background, Clem, it goes back 34 years. I used to work at Anglo American. I joined them in 1986 and left them in 1994.
Gosh.
And in that time, I was employed in the corporate communications department across the road from 44 Main.
Yeah.
And I worked with the head of our department was Conrad Sidego.
Absolutely, Conrad.
And his predecessor was Neville Huxon.
Yep.
Conrad, yes. And so I used to do mainly the designing of the annual reports for Anglo, Anglo Gold, Amcol, and so forth. So I was involved more in the serious part of the design work, but I was also a cartoonist, doing cartoon caricatures. So I ended up doing caricatures of Gavin Reilly, Bobby Gottsall, Michael Spicer, even Mr. Gavin Bastard, what's it? Graham Bastard.
Graham Bastard. Graham Bastard. Graham.
Yeah, Graham Bastard, yes. So, even though I was doing the serious design work of annual reports, because they knew I could do cartoons, the internal newsletter at the time was called Interface.
Oh, yes.
And they asked me, when you became chairman of at Anglo Gold in 1990.
Yeah.
They asked me to do a cartoon caricature of you, and they published it in the internal newsletter. And a week later, I got the original cartoon back. But I said to them, please, you've got to get this to Clem somehow. But I can't remember what happened, but it never ever got to you, which was most unfortunate. I got the original here.
Yeah.
It's this size, it's fairly big.
Oh, yes.
And you can see on a gold bar there. Can you see there?
Oh, yes. Lovely.
So it's the original cartoon, all hand colored and everything. And I thought, there's no point in me hanging on to this. I thought you would like the original. You can put it in a frame, and you can see how much you still look as young as that.
No. Lovely.
Oh, awesome.
So I'd really like to get this to you.
Okay. Well, I don't know if Scott's going to help.
Yeah, we'll figure it. We'll figure it out. I just thought it'd be a nice way.
I have to say that's brilliant. I love it. I love it to bits, and I would
Thank
love
you very much.
it. Yeah. Oh.
We'll make a plane. We'll make a plane and get it to you.
Yeah, it makes me suddenly feel young again. I have to say to anybody who's still on this webinar that in 1964.
Sorry, this is my son in the background. Yes. Clem, you have to say what? Sorry, this.
I was going to say in 1964, I used to play guitar in an Oxford University rock band, and Magdalen College summer ball 64. We shared the not the stage because we were in a different room, but we shared the evening with the Rolling Stones. With the Rolling Stones, and if you actually Google,
wow,
Rolling Stones,
wow,
Oxford, 1964.
What year was that?
An original kind of program of the event, and you'll see the Rolling Stones. So they weren't a cabaret; they were playing Rolling Stones, and then you'll see Clem and John. So there you go.
I think it's a nice way to finish off. I'm conscious of your time. You've been incredible tonight, sharing with us. And I just wanted to say, we'll organise. Carla, thanks very much for reaching out to us. It's a nice surprise. And to all of you, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. And Clem, specifically to you, it's been a long journey, in terms of you and I doing these presentations. And every time I deeply, deeply appreciate it. I love getting the information and the community. I don't know if you could see all the comments, but there's hundreds of comments from people thanking you for your time tonight. So I deeply, deeply appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it too, Scott. I've really loved this evening. I really love the questions that have been raised, and that comes back to that point that Abdul made. It's not just about somebody presenting or whatever it is. It's about the discussion and actually sitting around a table and exploring different ideas. And we've certainly done that this evening. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Cheers, cheers.
Cheers, cheers. Bye-bye.